Hello and welcome to my presentation on just war theory and cyber warfare. Specifically, can just war theory be applied to cyber warfare? For an outline of my presentation, we'll start by talking about cyber warfare with a definition and some examples. We'll then move into covering just war theory and what its roots are. Then we'll have our discussion on whether or not just war theory can be applied to cyber warfare. I'll give you my concluding thoughts on the matter and show you my references. So to start off with defining cyber warfare, it's defined as organized attempts by one country to compromise the computer networks of another, with the goal of disrupting basic systems such as military, telecommunications, transportation, or finance. Now, some other pertinent points about cyber warfare are that it can also be waged by and against non-political entities, such as groups of hackers or businesses and firms. And also, an important thing to remember with cyber warfare is that increased global dependency on information technology has led to more vulnerability with cyber attacks. Now, to look at some examples of cyber warfare, these are definitely major examples. The first one was in 2007. It was a denial of service attack on Estonia. Now, Russia is believed to be responsible for this attack, in which they disabled the websites of government ministries, political parties, newspapers, banks, and companies in Estonia. This was the first known massive cyber attack on a nation state. Next, in 2008, the U.S. military networks were breached by an infected flash drive having been inserted into a U.S. military laptop. Malicious code spread stealthily through the military's networks and readied itself to transfer military data into enemy hands. At the time, one Pentagon official noted that this was the most significant breach in history of the U.S. military's networks. And lastly, in 2009, there was what was known as the Stuxnet attack, and it's believed to be a joint U.S.-Israeli effort in order to subvert Iranian efforts to enrich uranium at their Natanz nuclear power plant. Now, some unique challenges of cyber warfare are the following. It is a relatively new form of warfare, so similar to biological and nuclear warfare. Thereby, it has a policy vacuum. There's no internationally agreed upon policy or embraced policy by nations around the globe in order to guide the ethical conduct of cyber warfare. There's also the attribution problem, which means that it can be difficult to determine the source of cyber attacks a lot of times. Now, often these attacks are non-lethal, so many cyber attacks will not be lethal and will not even result in permanent damage to physical objects. As you can tell, very different from traditional methods of warfare. And lastly, there's no need for exotic components if you're going to conduct cyber warfare. Diaper refers to one writer from the MIT Technology Review, and he says that any computer is a potential cyber weapon, and anyone with advanced knowledge of information systems is a potential cyber combatant. So this could be an everyday person, you would think, with just a normal computer. That can be used. It's not anything exotic to wage cyber warfare. Okay? Now, how do people around the globe feel about cyber attacks? As you can see here, this is an infographic from Statista.com using data from the Pew Research Center, showing results from a survey of people in 38 countries across the globe. People consider cyber attacks from other countries as one of the biggest threats facing the world in 2017. And again, we touched on this earlier, but as technological dependency increases around the globe, so does vulnerability to cyber attacks. So unfortunately, this threat is here to stay. Now, turning our attention to the just war theory, it has its roots in Indian poetry with the Mahabharata and Christian theology, touching on concepts from St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. But not only is it of incredible concern to thinkers of religious tradition, but also it's the same for secular thinkers of modern times. And that can be demonstrated with the publicity surrounding the recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. All right, so just war theory has to do with proper ethics and morality when going to war, and then also conduct within the warfare itself. You can see here three aspects of just war theory that I want to touch on. Now, the first is jus ad bellum, which is Latin, and it basically means the right to go to war. Okay, which according to the theory, war must be declared by a legitimate governing authority having a just cause to go to war, basically self-defense, with a reasonable hope for success and clear intentionality in terms of what the nation declaring war expects to accomplish. Okay, so then we move to jus in bello, which basically means proper conduct while engaged in war. And the theory here touches again on proper intention with how a nation carries out the mission that it wants to accomplish. It must be that that nation uses appropriate proportionality for the mission. You don't want to drop a nuclear bomb on a city because a small-scale cyber attack came from that city. That would not be in line with just war theory in terms of appropriate proportionality. And then you also want to have just conduct in terms of dealing with prisoners, non-combatants, as well as the types of weaponry used. Okay? And then the jus post bellum, this is not really a part of traditional just war theory. It's more of an addition by modern theorists. But it speaks of proper conduct after the war, thinking of things like peace treaties, war crimes, handling those, proper reparations, etc. But for the sake of our discussion, we'll focus more on jus ad bellum and jus in bello, the right to go to war, and then proper conduct in war, since those are the two main cogs of just war theory. Now, let's have our discussion. Can just war theory be applied to cyber warfare? We have one gentleman, Dr. Edward T. Barrett, who is the director of the U.S. Naval Academy's Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership, and he puts forth the following ideas in his writings. He says that yes, you can use just war theory and apply it to cyber warfare. Okay? He says that nations have to weigh out the intentions and effects of cyber attacks when deciding how to respond. Responses must be in kind, so low-level cyber attacks can ethically be responded to by counterattacks of the same sort. But he also says that if any of these cyber attacks lead to a temporary loss of functionality to life-sustaining property that resulted in a loss of life, this would be just cause for an armed or physical attack, right in line with just war theory. Well, you also have Dr. Randall Dipert from the State University at New York, Buffalo, and he says that no, you can't apply just war theory to cyber warfare. All right? He says that there's a large array of possible scenarios involving cyber attacks for which there don't exist obvious moral reasoning or even straightforward analogies that could guide us. Because the effects of cyber attacks so rarely cause damage to human lives and material objects, Dipert posits that one cannot apply these traditional theories like just war theory. He also points out that NATO declared that the Russian cyber attack on Estonia that was previously mentioned did not constitute an act of war that demanded mutual defense obligations from the organization. So if anyone wants to cite previous precedent for future rulings, you have an example of that there in terms of what Dipert's saying. Dipert also states that a cyber attack does not involve intrusions into the territory or airspace by soldiers or even physical objects of a sovereign nation. It's his take that this is not like traditional warfare and thus undermines the use of traditional just war theory. So he sees holes in the notion that a cyber attack accurately fits within the traditional definition of an attack that justifies an armed response. And so now to bring you my concluding thoughts on the matter. When dealing in the arena of cyber warfare, I believe nations can be guided by the principles of just war theory. And here's why I think this. It provides, while not perfect, in my opinion, it provides the best ethical framework for decisions regarding the prosecution of cyber warfare. So in the absence of an internationally agreed upon set of policies or norms regarding cyber warfare, we can use that which has so reliably guided nations in the conduct of traditional warfare to guide us with regard to this new form of warfare, cyber warfare. Next, understanding the intentionality and effect of a given cyber attack can help legitimate governments determine an ethical response guided by the principles of just war theory. So they can weigh out the intentions and effects of cyber attacks that they've suffered and deliberate on whether or not a just cause exists for a response. And if it does, they can develop clear intentions for the prosecution of the counterattack and make those known. And this process covers the jus ad bellum, or right to go to war, aspect of the theory. Next, if nations find themselves with just cause to respond to a cyber attack, they can weigh the proportionality of the response in light of what the effects of the original attack were determined to be. So this proportionality relates to the jus in bello, or proper conduct in war, aspect of the theory. And lastly, even Dipert indicates in agreement with Barrett that there are cases in which cyber warfare could theoretically bring about an effect that causes loss of human life if it damages systems that are essential to human life. So this type of event could serve as just cause for physical, armed responses right in line with just war theory. So there you have it in a brief fashion. It's my opinion that just war theory can rightly be applied to cyber warfare. For further reading if you'd like to do some, and I appreciate you joining me for my presentation.